The day before Thanksgiving, 1971, airports across America were buzzing with the familiar energy of holiday travel. Families were heading home, students were on break, the air was filled with anticipation. On the tarmac at Portland International Airport, Northwest Orient. Airlines Flight 305 was preparing for a short hop to Seattle. It was a routine flight on a routine day, or so everyone thought. Passengers boarded the Boeing 727, stowing their carry-ons, settling into their seats. The flight attendants went through their pre-flight checks. Everything was perfectly normal. But among the faces in the cabin was one man who had no intention of reaching Seattle. He was about to turn this ordinary flight into one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. His ticket was booked under the name Dan Cooper. The media would later misreport it as D.B. Cooper, a mistake that stuck and became legendary. He was a quiet man, middle-aged, dressed in a dark business suit with a black tie and a crisp white shirt. He looked like any other businessman on his way to a meeting. Florence Schaffner, professional and composed, retrieved the note from her pocket. Her heart must have been pounding. The handwritten message was polite but terrifyingly direct. It confirmed what the man had whispered. He had a bomb in his briefcase. He wanted her to sit next to him. She complied to avoid panic. He calmly opened his briefcase just enough for her to see inside. A tangle of wires, red-colored sticks, a large battery. It looked real. It looked deadly. Whether real or bluff, the threat felt immediate to everyone on board. Cooper stated his demands, flat and unemotional. $200,000 in negotiable American currency, in unmarked $20 bills. He demanded 4 parachutes, 2 primary back chutes, 2 reserve chest chutes. They contacted a local skydiving school. An employee raced to find the requested gear. The clock was ticking. Back on the plane, Cooper remained composed. He insisted the plane circle over Puget Sound while supplies were prepared. He ordered another bourbon and soda and paid for it. He chatted casually with flight attendants about routes and jobs. This wasn't desperation, it was a meticulous plan. For nearly 2 hours, Flight 305 circled in the sky. To the passengers, it was just a holding pattern. They were told there was a minor mechanical issue. The crew, however, knew the terrifying truth. Captain Scott spoke to the passengers over the intercom, his voice steady. The flight attendants continued their service, smiling and reassuring people, all while keeping a watchful eye on Cooper. It was a masterclass in professionalism under extreme pressure. On the ground, the FBI and Northwest Orient officials were in a frenzy. The president of the airline, Donald Nyrop, made the decision to cooperate fully. There would be no heroics, no attempts to storm the plane. The money was gathered, a massive stack of 10,000 $20 bills. The parachutes were procured from a local skydiving center. Flight 305 was cleared to land at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. As the plane descended through the rainy darkness, the airport below was a fortress. Once the plane was stopped, a single airline employee walked out to the aircraft carrying the money-filled knapsack and the parachutes. The exchange was made through the forward cabin door. He allowed all 36 passengers to leave the plane. He allowed 2 of the flight attendants to leave, including Florence Schaffner. He kept the pilot. He kept the co-pilot. He kept a flight engineer. He kept 1 flight attendant, Tina Mucklow. And now he had a skeleton crew to fly him to his final destination, into the heart of the storm, and into legend. The longest night was far from over. With his ransom secured, D.B. Cooper laid out the second phase of his audacious plan. He instructed the pilots to take off again, this time heading southeast toward Mexico City. He wanted the plane to fly at a low altitude of 10,000 feet, landing gear down, wing flaps lowered to 15 degrees, airspeed at 200 knots. It was the perfect speed for a parachute jump, slow enough to be survivable but fast enough to make pinpointing a landing zone nearly impossible. The flight crew was stunned. These instructions were highly unusual and precarious. Before takeoff, Cooper had one last command. He ordered the crew to stay in the cockpit with the door closed. He would be alone in the main cabin. The 727 lumbered back into the stormy night sky. Tina Mucklow saw him tying the bag of money to himself. He was calm, methodical, as if he'd practiced this 100 times. He helped her with her seatbelt and told her to stay put. Then he walked to the rear of the plane, alone with his fortune and his parachutes. The key to his escape plan was the 727's aft air stair. It's a staircase at the very back of the plane, under the tail, that can be lowered in flight. Cooper knew this. He had chosen this aircraft for that reason. It was his private exit door. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, between Seattle and Reno, over the rugged black wilderness of southwestern Washington, a warning light flashed in the cockpit. It indicated the aft staircase had been lowered. The pilots felt a change in air pressure. They called Cooper on the intercom. There was no answer. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the crew felt a sudden upward movement in the tail section. A subtle oscillation. A body, a man weighing maybe 170 pounds plus 20 pounds of cash, left the plane. D.B. Cooper, with his $200,000 ransom, had jumped at 10,000 feet into a freezing rainstorm, at night, over unforgiving, densely forested terrain. He vanished into the abyss. When the plane landed in Reno hours later, authorities swarmed aboard. The cabin was empty. They found 2 of the 4 parachutes. They found Cooper's black clip-on tie. They found a spent cigarette. The man himself was gone. The moment the plane landed empty in Reno, the largest and most intensive manhunt in United States history kicked into gear. The FBI, local law enforcement, military personnel faced an almost impossible task. They had to find one man, or what was left of him, somewhere in a vast, rugged wilderness. The search zone was a sprawling area of southwestern Washington, dense forests, treacherous mountains, freezing rivers. The weather was terrible, low clouds, heavy rain, snow at higher elevations. It was a needle in a haystack problem, but first, they had to find the haystack. The pilots could only give a general idea of where they were when Cooper jumped. Hundreds of soldiers from Fort Lewis, Washington were deployed for a massive ground search. They formed long lines, marching shoulder to shoulder through the thick underbrush, searching for parachute, body, bag of money. The terrain was brutal, steep ravines, icy streams, thorny bushes. It was slow, exhausting, and dangerous work. For weeks they combed the area inch by painstaking inch. Helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft tried to assist from above, but the dense forest canopy made spotting anything from the air nearly impossible. The search was a testament to sheer human effort against the overwhelming power of nature. The FBI codenamed the investigation NORJAC, for Northwest Hijacking. Agents began the painstaking police work of collecting evidence, interviewing every possible witness. The most significant piece of physical evidence left behind was the black clip-on tie. It was a long shot, but forensic science was their best hope. Maybe, just maybe, the tie held a clue. Hair, skin cell, particle of something that could tell them who this man was or where he came from. As the days turned into weeks, the search yielded nothing. No body, no parachute, no money. The vast, silent forest kept its secrets. The sheer scale of the wilderness seemed to swallow him whole. Did he survive the jump? It was a hotly debated question. Many experts believed the odds were stacked against him. The jump was at night, into a freezing storm, with winds over 100 miles per hour. He was wearing a business suit, not proper skydiving gear. He could have been injured on exit, landed in a tree, succumbed to hypothermia. But without a body there was no proof. The lack of evidence was in itself evidence of how perfectly he had vanished. With the ground search turning up nothing, the FBI shifted its focus to the man himself. Who was Dan Cooper? They started with the most obvious clue, the name on the ticket. But it quickly became clear that Dan Cooper was an alias. The name led them to a man in Oregon with a minor police record, but he was swiftly cleared. The hijacker had plucked the name out of thin air, a clever move that sent investigators on their first of many wild goose chases. The media's accidental creation of D.B. Cooper only added to the confusion, causing the FBI to waste precious time investigating and clearing innocent men with those initials. The hijacker's identity was a complete blank slate. The primary tool for identifying the suspect was the composite sketch. Based on interviews with the flight attendants who had the most interaction with Cooper, the FBI created a face for the Phantom. The sketches depicted a man in his mid-40s, with dark hair, brown eyes, and an unremarkable face. He was described as being between 5'10" and 6 feet tall. The problem was, the description fit thousands of men. The sketches were published in newspapers and broadcast on television stations across the country. Tips poured in by the thousands. Every man who had a grudge against an airline, had recently quit his job, or simply looked like the sketch became a person of interest. It was a flood of information, but most of it led nowhere. The investigation became a process of elimination on a massive scale. The FBI investigated and ruled out more than 800 suspects in the first 5 years alone. They looked into men with skydiving experience, military paratroopers, and disgruntled airline employees. They checked the backgrounds of known criminals. Each lead was meticulously followed, but each one ended in a dead end. The hijacker seemed to have no past. He didn't brag to friends, he didn't suddenly show up with a lot of cash. He simply ceased to exist after jumping from that plane. It was as if he had materialized on Flight 305 for a few hours and then dissolved back into thin air. One of the most promising leads was the money itself. The FBI had the serial numbers for every single one of the 10,000 $20 bills. They released the list to banks, casinos, and law enforcement agencies around the world. The hope was that Cooper, if he survived, would eventually have to spend the money. Any bill that surfaced would be a blinking red light, a signal that Cooper was out there. For years, they waited for a hit, but the ransom money remained as elusive as the man who took it. The serial numbers became a ghost list, a digital trail that led absolutely nowhere. The silence was deafening, and the trail grew colder with each passing day. For nearly a decade, the D.B. Cooper case was frozen in time. The trail was ice cold. No new leads, no suspects, not a single dollar of the ransom money had ever surfaced. The mystery was slowly fading from the front pages, becoming more of a modern folktale than an active investigation. Then, in February 1980, everything changed. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was on a family vacation, digging a fire pit on a sandy stretch of the Columbia River at a place called Tina Bar, about 20 miles southwest of where Cooper was thought to have jumped. As he cleared away the sand, his hands hit something odd. It was 3 decaying bundles of cash. The Ingram family immediately contacted the authorities. When FBI agents arrived, they knew this was a monumental breakthrough. The bills were waterlogged and partially decomposed, but they were still identifiable. The agents painstakingly separated the fragile notes and began checking the serial numbers against the official Norjack ransom list. The results were electrifying. It was a match. Brian Ingram had found $5,800 of D.B. Cooper's money. After 9 long years of silence, a piece of the legend had finally washed up from the depths of time. The discovery reignited the case, sparking a media frenzy and sending investigators scrambling back to the drawing board. This discovery raised more questions than it answered. How did the money get there? Tina Bar was not directly under the flight path. One theory suggested that Cooper landed in or near a tributary of the Columbia River, and the money was washed downstream over the years, eventually being deposited on the sandbar. Hydrologists studied the river's currents and concluded this was a plausible scenario. However, the money was found in 3 neat stacks still held together by rubber bands. If it had tumbled down a river for 9 years, wouldn't the bundles have broken apart? This detail puzzled everyone. It almost looked as if the money had been placed there, not washed ashore. The find also breathed new life into the debate about Cooper's fate. The fact that only a small portion of the money was found and in such a specific location led to endless speculation. Did Cooper lose some of the money during the jump, or upon landing? Did he bury the rest nearby, planning to come back for it later? Or did he perish in the wilderness? And this small packet was the only part of his haul that ever made it into the river system. Despite extensive searches of Tina Bar and the surrounding areas, no more money was ever found. The river had given up one small secret, but it was holding tight to the rest of the story. With the case back in the public eye, the list of potential suspects grew longer and more colorful. Over the years, dozens of men have been named as possible D.B. Coopers, each with a compelling backstory. One of the earliest and most prominent suspects was Richard McCoy Jr., Vietnam veteran, helicopter pilot, avid skydiver. Just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy pulled off a nearly identical crime. He hijacked a United Airlines flight for a $500,000 ransom and parachuted out over Utah. The similarities were uncanny. The FBI caught McCoy and convicted him. He always denied being Cooper. He later escaped prison and was killed in a shootout with law enforcement. Still, his alibi for the night of the Cooper hijacking seemed solid. Another suspect, Dwayne Weber, a World War II veteran with a life of crime. On his deathbed in 1995, he told his wife, "I'm Dan Cooper." After his death, his wife began connecting the dots. He had an old knee injury, supposedly from jumping out of a plane. He had a nightmare about leaving fingerprints on the aft stair. He bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch. The FBI ran a DNA test on his belongings against the partial DNA profile from the tie Cooper left behind. Not a match. Perhaps the most meticulously researched suspect was Robert Rackstraw, a military veteran with parachute and explosives training. Private investigators led by Thomas J. Colbert spent years building a case. They pointed to coded letters allegedly sent by Rackstraw to news outlets. They argued his military experience and profile fit. The FBI had looked at Rackstraw in the late 1970s but officially cleared him. Rackstraw played coy for years and never admitted it before his death in 2019. These men are just the tip of the iceberg. Barbara Dayton, Lynn Doyle Cooper, countless others. Each theory has champions and detractors. Each suspect's life was scrutinized for clues. But in every case, the FBI says there isn't enough hard evidence to name anyone definitively. The face in the sketch remains a ghost, a composite that could belong to anyone or no one. In July 2016, after decades of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case. D.B. Cooper's true identity, fate, and the fate of most of the ransom money remain one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The legend of D.B. Cooper lives on, in books, documentaries, and the imagination of millions. Was he a criminal mastermind who got away with the perfect crime, or a desperate man who vanished into the wilderness? The answer may never be known, but the story of D.B. Cooper endures, a mystery that for now belongs to the ages.